Rajesh Patel, an ambitious immigrant chasing a new life in the UK, and Claire Thompson, a lonely British woman longing for love, seemed like an unlikely couple. But behind their rushed marriage was a dangerous web of lies, betrayal, and desperation, one that would spiral into a brutal killing and leave an entire community stunned. Rajesh Patel had grown up in a small town in Gujarat with endless ambitions but few resources to make them a reality. He believed that moving abroad would open doors to money, security, and respect he could never achieve back home. When he first landed in London, everything seemed exciting. The busy streets, the towering buildings, the opportunities. But within a few months, reality struck hard. His student visa was running out, and the job he worked at a local convenience store barely covered rent. Each passing day reminded him that without legal residency, his dreams of a new life were slowly collapsing. He began looking for solutions. Some of his fellow immigrants quietly whispered about quick paths to citizenship through arranged marriages with locals. It was risky and morally questionable, but many claimed it worked. Rajesh initially hesitated. He told himself he wanted to succeed through hard work. Yet as bills piled up and his visa neared its end, desperation blurred his sense of right and wrong. The temptation became too strong to resist. Through a mutual friend, Rajesh was introduced to Claire Thompson, a woman in her late 30s living in Birmingham. Claire had lived a quiet and lonely life after several failed relationships. Her family rarely visited, and her friends had all moved on with their own lives. She longed for companionship, someone who would give her a sense of importance and belonging. Rajesh recognized her vulnerability almost immediately. To him, she was not just a woman, but a golden opportunity, someone who could give him what he most desired, the right to stay in the United Kingdom. He played his part carefully, presenting himself as kind, soft-spoken, and attentive. He told Claire stories about his struggles, painting himself as a man who simply wanted stability and a family. She believed him, drawn to his charm and the warmth he seemed to offer. For Claire, it felt like fate had finally given her another chance at happiness. Their relationship moved quickly. Within months, Rajesh proposed marriage, assuring Claire that he wanted to spend his life with her. The ceremony was small, attended by only a handful of people. Claire glowed with hope, dreaming of a fresh start with her new husband. Rajesh, on the other hand, wore the same smile but carried very different thoughts. As he signed the marriage certificate, he felt a surge of relief rather than love. For him, this was not a romantic union, but the final step towards securing a future in a country that promised him everything he had ever wanted. The early days of marriage between Rajesh and Claire appeared ordinary to outsiders, but behind the facade, cracks were already beginning to show. Claire tried to convince herself that they were still adjusting as a couple, that small misunderstandings were natural. She cooked his favorite meals, decorated their modest home with little touches to make it welcoming, and spoke endlessly about plans for their future. Yet Rajesh's reactions were distant and lukewarm. He rarely joined in her enthusiasm and often found excuses to avoid long conversations. When friends asked about their marriage, Claire smiled and said everything was wonderful, though in private she felt an unease she could not explain. Rajesh, meanwhile, treated the marriage as a practical arrangement. He understood the importance of maintaining appearances, but his patience for the charade was limited. At work he kept to himself, and at home he was restless. He spent long nights on his phone, whispering into the receiver in his native language, hiding in corners of the house so Claire could not overhear. These calls were not to business contacts or distant relatives, but to his girlfriend in India. With her his tone softened, his laughter returned, and his words flowed freely. He reassured her that once his documents were finalized, he would send for her, and they would live the life they had dreamed of together. Claire noticed his absences more often. Some evenings Rajesh claimed to be working late or meeting friends, yet he never explained who those friends were. On weekends, when she wanted to go out together, he resisted, preferring to stay indoors or vanish for hours. The intimacy she longed for never arrived. Physical affection was scarce, and emotional closeness felt non-existent. She excused it at first, blaming cultural differences or the pressures of his work. But slowly, her excuses no longer sounded convincing, even to herself. Her friends began voicing doubts as well. They observed the lack of warmth between the couple and questioned Rajesh's intentions. Claire defended him out of loyalty, embarrassed to admit that their marriage was not what she had imagined. Still, late at night, when she lay awake in bed and Rajesh typed quietly on his phone, the truth began to creep into her mind. The distance was undeniable. The promises he had once made about a loving partnership seemed hollow. What she did not yet realize was that Rajesh's heart had never been hers to begin with. She had become nothing more than a stepping stone in his carefully constructed plan for survival. One rainy afternoon, while tidying up the living room, Claire came across an envelope carelessly tucked beneath a pile of papers. At first, she thought it was nothing more than a bill or an old letter, but curiosity led her to open it. Inside were immigration forms, correspondence with lawyers, and bank slips showing money transfers to India. Each page painted a disturbing picture of deception. The realization struck her with the weight of betrayal. Rajesh had never intended to build a life with her. Their marriage was not about love or partnership, but a carefully designed strategy to gain residency. Her hands trembled as she flipped through the documents, reading the clinical language of visa applications that reduced their relationship to a transaction. The bank transfers told an even darker truth. Large sums had been sent regularly to a woman whose name she did not recognize, but the affectionate notes attached to some payments left little doubt about who she was. Claire understood immediately that Rajesh's heart belonged elsewhere. She was not a wife to him, but a pawn in his scheme, a means to an end. For days, Claire kept the discovery to herself, pretending nothing had changed. Outwardly, she went about her daily routine, but inside, her emotions shifted dramatically. At first, there was sorrow. She wept quietly at night, crushed by the thought that she had been used so cruelly. She thought back to the day she said her vows, remembering how hopeful she had felt, and now those memories seemed like nothing but lies. The sorrow slowly transformed into humiliation. She imagined the whispers of neighbors and friends if they ever discovered the truth. She feared being seen as foolish, gullible, and desperate. As time passed, sorrow and humiliation gave way to anger. Each time Rajesh returned home late without explanation, Claire's mind replayed the documents she had found. Each secret phone call, each cold glance, and each dismissive gesture became proof of his betrayal. She started keeping the documents hidden, almost like weapons she was saving for the right moment. Her trust had shattered beyond repair, and something darker began to grow in its place. Though Rajesh remained oblivious to her knowledge, the balance of their household shifted. Claire no longer looked at him with the same softness. Her silence was not ignorance, but calculation. Deep inside, her heartbreak was mutating into something dangerous, a simmering rage that waited only for the right spark to ignite. The tension inside their home grew heavier with every passing week. Rajesh carried on with his routine, confident that Claire still remained blind to his secrets. He underestimated her silence, mistaking it for weakness, when in reality it had become the breeding ground for fury. She watched him closely, memorizing his patterns, the late night calls, the careless excuses, the way his eyes avoided hers whenever she tried to hold his gaze. Her resentment built slowly, like water behind a dam, waiting for the inevitable moment when it would break. That breaking point came one late evening. Rajesh had returned home well past midnight, smelling faintly of alcohol and perfume, his shirt collar creased as if it had been clutched by someone else's hands. Claire had been waiting in the living room, the stack of incriminating documents spread out on the table in front of her. She had poured herself glass after glass of wine, her emotions spiraling from sorrow to a storm of rage. When he walked in and saw the papers, his face darkened with irritation rather than guilt. Words flew between them, sharp and venomous, each accusation met with denial and dismissal. The argument quickly escalated. Rajesh's tone grew harsher, his voice raised in anger as he tried to reassert control. Claire's fury, however, had reached a point beyond reason. In her mind, this was not just a fight about lies, but about her dignity, her years wasted on a man who had deceived her so cruelly. The candlestick on the mantel caught her eye, heavy, metallic, and within reach. Fueled by a surge of uncontrollable rage, she snatched it up and struck him with all her strength. The first blow stunned him, but she did not stop. Again and again the candlestick came crashing down until Rajesh collapsed, blood pooling across the carpet in sickening patterns. When silence finally filled the room, the reality of what she had done sank in. Claire dropped the weapon, her hands trembling as she stared at his lifeless body. Panic overwhelmed her, but it was too late to turn back. Desperate to save herself, she scrambled to clean the blood, wiping surfaces and scattering objects to make the house look ransacked. She smashed a window, overturned furniture, and staged the scene as if intruders had broken in. Yet despite her frantic efforts, the chaos in the room betrayed something far more personal. Outside, the neighbors had already heard the violent shouts and thuds. By the time Claire collapsed onto the sofa, breathing heavily, the sound of sirens was already approaching in the distance. The crime scene told its story almost immediately. Detectives arriving at the house saw through the clumsy attempt to stage a burglary. The smashed window was broken from the inside, shards scattered across the floor rather than outside in the garden. Valuable items like electronics and jewelry remained untouched, contradicting the idea of a robbery. Blood patterns indicated a struggle that had taken place in the center of the living room rather than near the supposed point of entry. Claire sat in shock as officers questioned her, her explanations shaky and inconsistent. The weight of the evidence was already against her before she even realized it. In the days that followed, investigators pieced the puzzle together. They examined Rajesh's background and unearthed the marriage fraud. Phone records revealed his secret relationship in India, with messages and financial transfers confirming his betrayal. But while his deception explained Claire's emotional state, it did not justify the brutality of her actions. The candlestick, still stained with blood, carried her fingerprints, and the neighbors' statements about the sounds of fighting sealed her fate. Within a week, she was arrested and formally charged with murder. The trial that followed captured public attention. Reporters filled the courtroom, eager to cover the sensational case of a sham marriage that had spiraled into violence. The prosecution painted Claire as a woman consumed by rage, who chose revenge over reason. They emphasized the number of blows inflicted, arguing it showed not self-defense but intent to kill. The defense, on the other hand, portrayed her as a victim of manipulation and emotional abuse, driven to breaking point by Rajesh's lies and exploitation. The jury listened as every detail of their troubled marriage was laid bare, exposing the fragile line between love, desperation, and fury. When the verdict was finally delivered, the atmosphere was tense. Claire was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life imprisonment, with a minimum term set before parole could even be considered. The ruling sent a clear message. Betrayal might provoke anger, but it could never excuse taking a life. Rajesh's dream of British citizenship died with him, and Claire's freedom was stripped away in the same moment. Both had gambled with deceit, but the outcome left nothing but devastation. The case lingered in the minds of those who followed it. Neighbors spoke of the quiet street, forever marked by tragedy. Journalists described it as a cautionary tale of how lies and hidden motives could spiral into catastrophe. In the end, the story was not just about fraud or murder, but about how deception, once set in motion, can destroy everyone it touches.